Epilogue.
"How did you ever think of using the bookworm?" Dr. Barnaby asked.
Hoggie shrugged.
I was just thinking, what would be worse? To keep the mirror and never see Aunt Michelle again, or to give the book to the kidnapper and have him turn the entire planet upside down? When I heard the bookworm recite a cookbook, it always does that when it's hungry, that was when it occurred to me.
"I see."
Do you think it was the right thing to do?"
Hoggie asked.
I mean, destroying the mirror?
"Yes,"
Dr. Barnaby replied without a moment's hesitation.
"It is better if the book did not exist at all, than if it fell into the hands of an evil man."
Hoggie, Scooter, and Dr. Barnaby were sitting in the park outside the library. By then, 3 months had gone, and things were more or less back to normal. The dam had been restored, and the water had slowly returned to the river. The park was still soggy, and the city's shopkeepers were still fighting mould in their cellars, but the buses were running, and most of the businesses were open again. Dr. Barnaby had to stay in London for most of the summer, because the police needed his help in determining what happened in the Luxembourg Hotel. They eventually figured out whose body they had found in room 406. It was Danny's.
"It turns out that Danny Dudd and Jonathan Brickenhoff had been making inquiries about me just prior to the fire,"
Dr. Barnaby explained to his young friends that afternoon in the park.
"The two crooks must have found out somehow about Nicholas's visit to the hotel. Perhaps they had followed him there. When they discovered that I was a book expert, they probably imagined that Mem was about to double-cross them, and so they sneaked into my hotel room, hoping to learn more. Luckily for me, and unfortunately for them, I was not in my hotel room. In fact, I was in a different town altogether, trying to ascertain the identity of Jimmy Krantz. And when I heard about the fire and my untimely death, I thought it wise to remain out of everyone's sight just a little longer."
For a few moments, Dr. Barnaby watched Higgledy and Piggledy chase each other around a tree, and then helped General to dig a hole in the ground. Scooter had been taking General out ever since he had managed to explain to his dad about the bird. He hadn't actually told him that General was a dodo, but he had told him about it being a rare Australian bird, and his dad had let him keep it, provided it did not ruin any more books.
"Danny must have brought a crossbow with him to make himself appear more menacing. As he was lying in wait in my hotel room, he accidentally shot himself. The police pathologist is convinced that the poor fool stumbled on the rug and fell on his own weapon, even though the investigating officers had difficulty accepting this theory at first."
Hoggie thought that no one who had ever met Danny in person would have a problem with this theory.
"When Jonathan Brickenhoff found Danny dead in my room, he panicked," Dr. Barnaby continued. "He knew that if the police found out about his dead mate, they would eventually find out about him, and so the crook set the room on fire to cover his tracks."
How do you think Brickenhoff explained the dead body and the fire in the hotel to Nicholas Mem?
Scooter asked.
"Judging by the surprise Nicholas showed when he saw me on that rooftop, he knew nothing about Danny's and Brickenhoff's antics. Perhaps Brickenhoff was so scared he left town the same day. He is still missing, by the way. The police found one of his boots down in the tunnels. They think that was how he escaped London."
Scooter thought of the giant crocodile he and Hoggie had encountered in the catacombs. He had serious doubts that Jonathan Brickenhoff ever left London.
"Do you think we'll ever hear about Nicholas Mem again?"
Hoggie asked suddenly.
"I'm afraid we shall,"
Dr. Barnaby replied.
"Didn't you say once that he was one of your students?"
"He was," the archaeographer confirmed. "My most brilliant student, I must add. At the age of 17, he knew more about ancient manuscripts than all of England's university professors combined. He could read in 6 living languages, and just as many dead ones, and no one in the whole world could determine any book's origins faster than he could. He was destined for an extraordinary academic career. By the time he graduated from the university, museums and colleges were fighting to have him on their staff.
"Why, then, did he become a thief?"
Scooter asked. Dr. Barnaby shrugged.
"I guess he found an academic career boring. Planning and executing elaborate burglaries and impersonating other people was a lot more exciting for Nicholas Mem than sitting in some dusty archive day in and day out, and a great deal more lucrative too."
"And how did he learn about the mirror?"
"Oh, that." Dr. Barnaby rubbed his sore leg. "Well, the rumours of a magical book that could make one's wishes come true had been circulating within the Society of Saint Jerome for centuries. It's just that most people dismissed them as a legend. Not Nicholas, though. By the time he first heard of the mirror, he had travelled most of the world. He had seen some rather unusual books, so he took those rumours very seriously. He traced the book's origin back to Central Asia, and followed its move to Egypt. He then spent years slithering his way into one of the families of the Alexandrian Brotherhood. It was from them that he learned about the Libris."
"Did you know about the secret library all along?"
Scooter asked, studying the library's building illuminated by the bright summer sun.
"I knew that Alexander Libri built something of the kind," Dr. Barnaby confirmed, "but I did not know where it was, or how one could get into it. I am really quite lucky that I had you two to help me solve this mystery."
Scooter blushed.
"I am also quite sorry that I have never had a chance to see it with my own eyes," the archaeographer added.
"You would have loved it,"
Hoggie assured him. She then remembered that now that the lion was blocking the entrance to the secret library, she would never again have that chance either, and sighed. Still, she had to admit that even though they had lost access to the secret library, their strange adventure ended very well. To begin with, Hoggie, to her own and everyone else's surprise, graduated from the 5th year. In fact, she did rather well in her English and history classes. Her report on Alexander Libri's life impressed Mrs. Hamilton so much, the teacher sent a copy of it to some magazine. Aunt Michelle got a job at Paducci's, designing stage sets and costumes. She liked the job very much, and was quite happy at the circus, and she and Prospero were still together. Pickle, the chimpanzee, ended in the London Zoo. His stay there was absolutely miserable. All other apes must have sensed that he was different from them. They shunned him, and frequently beat him up.
"Now he knows how it feels to be bullied,"
Scooter remarked one day, when he, Hoggie, and Brick came to the zoo to visit Pickle. Hoggie only sighed. For some reason, the sight of Pickle getting his comeuppance did not leave her satisfied. If anything, she felt sorry for the poor thing. Brick took Pickle's sad fate even closer to heart.
"It's all my fault,"
he would say again and again, as the three of them watched some older chimps throw banana peels at Pickle. Pickle rolled himself into a ball in the corner of the monkey house, and was whimpering.
"Oh, come on," Scooter would say. "How could you possibly know that the book could turn him into an ape?" "I didn't," Brick would admit, "but I did want him to turn into one. I feel just awful."
In the end, Hoggie, Scooter, and Brick raided the zoo one night, and sprung Pickle out. Scooter was sceptical about this idea. He thought Pickle would be nothing but trouble. But he was wrong. Perhaps Pickle was glad to be out of a cage, or perhaps he was happy to be among people again. Either way, from that day on, he behaved as the good boy he had never been before. He took his food and baths without fuss, played with Higgledy and Piggledy nicely, and would sit for hours quietly by Brick's side, while the boy drew and painted. The giant croc was never found. Perhaps it was still wandering the catacombs underneath London, or perhaps it retreated when the river returned to its banks, and was now on its way to some Polynesian island. Humbaba was gone, though. The day after Nicholas Mem's escape, Dr. Barnaby and Macdermot went to the pawn-shop, and caught the monster in a large iron-plated coffer. Then Dr. Barnaby and his friends from the Society of Saint Jerome arranged for the coffer to be shipped off to some distant place where, according to the archaeographer, such things were kept. He did not explain where this place was, and, quite frankly, neither Hoggie nor Scooter wanted to know. They could not catch the dragon, of course, now that it was thousands of miles away, but Dr. Barnaby did not seem worried about it.
Dragons are not as mean as some people think they are. They much prefer cows and goats to young girls for their supper. They are quite shy and usually keep as far away from humans as they can. They also sleep most of the time, 7 years in a row. I am sure that Charlie's dragon has already found himself a nice, quiet cave somewhere, and is snoring away peacefully in it.
Dr. Barnaby also arranged for Brick to go to a school for young artists. It was a small, private school in the country, where talented boys and girls from all over the world spent hours every day, drawing landscapes and portraits, and visiting art museums, and getting lessons from professional artists. Brick was thrilled to go to his new school. He was even more thrilled when he learned that he could take Pickle with him.
"Why are you doing this?"
Brick asked Dr. Barnaby. After years of living with his mean father, the boy found it difficult to believe that someone would want to do something nice for him. Dr. Barnaby smiled.
"A big talent like yours, Charlie, can either bring people a lot of joy or a great deal of trouble. I want to make sure that you use it for good."
"I've been meaning to ask you,"
Hoggie said just then.
"Do you know what this is?"
She showed Dr. Barnaby the book she and Scooter had found in the wall safe in Oddities and Curiosities room. The scholar put on his glasses and studied the book for a few minutes. Then, suddenly his face stretched in a big smile.
"Congratulations, my young friends," he said. "What you have here is a very interesting and very rare volume."
"Really?"
Scooter perked up.
"Is it antique? Is it valuable?"
"It is neither,"
Dr. Barnaby replied with an even bigger smile. The children were confused.
"Then what's so special about it?"
"The book is special because it is truly one of a kind," the scholar explained.
"Do you know what it is about? Do you know who wrote it?"
Dr. Barnaby nodded.
"It was written about 150 years ago by a little English girl named Ethel."
What the book is about? The archaeographer shrugged.
"Probably about some strange and wonderful world this little girl used to live in when she was not going to school or helping her father in his bookshop. In this wonderful world there existed many people. They had their own history and their own customs. They even had their own language."
"A made-up language?"
Hoggie guessed.
"That is why we could not read the book."
Dr. Barnaby nodded again.
"Ethel wrote about her fantastic world in the book of blank pages she had found in her father's shop. It happened to be a very old book, some medieval bookbinder had made, but never thought of anything interesting to write in. And so, when later someone found Ethel's book in the bookshop, they thought it was a truly old volume. Over the years, many scholars tried to decipher the book's enigmatic language, but of course they all failed, because the language only existed in Ethel's clever little head. Eventually the book became quite famous among the book collectors. It was bought and sold several times, until, one day, Alexander Libri came across it at a book auction in Paris."
"Did he know it was a fake?"
"I think he did," Dr. Barnaby replied. "I think that he thought it would be quite fitting if Ethel's book replaced the book made by another girl, the girl who lived 3,000 years ago in the ancient kingdom of Bactria, and never had a chance to write down her own story."
"And what happened to Ethel afterwards?" Hoggy asked. "When she grew up?"
"She went on to become a writer, a very successful writer at that." Hoggy leafed through the fake book. She now had a whole new appreciation for it. "I can't believe you're leaving tomorrow," she said, after a few silent moments. "We are going to miss you." "We are," Scooter agreed. "Perhaps the two of you can visit me in Oxford some time," Dr. Barnaby suggested.
"Oh, we'd like that,"
Hoggy replied. Dr. Barnaby rose from the bench and picked up his walking-stick. "Well," he said, "it was a pleasure and an honour to know you. Let us not lose touch. I would very much like to know how your lives went, and what other wonderful books you discovered along the way."
The children promised to stay in touch, and the friends shook hands.
"I believe I owe you some money," Dr. Barnaby said just before he left. He took out his wallet, and was about to open it when Hoggy replied,
"No, you don't."
"Are you sure?"
Hoggy glanced at Scooter. The boy nodded, and so she said,
"Yes, we are. The agreement was that we would find the mirror and give it to you. We found the book, but never actually delivered it, so you don't have to pay us."
"Very well," Dr. Barnaby said, putting his wallet away. "It's your decision, and I must respect it, even though I hate to think that all of your hard work will go unrewarded."
Hoggy and Scooter merely smiled at that.
"Don't worry, it won't."
One day later that summer, Hoggy and Scooter knocked on the door of the Peacock Mansion. A maid answered the door, saw the children, and immediately announced,
"We don't need anything, thank you."
"We aren't selling anything," Scooter replied. He then explained to the woman that they wanted to see the owner of the mansion about a very important matter. The maid once again disappeared behind the door. The owner of the mansion must have been intrigued by the unusual visitors, for, in the end, he agreed to see them. Hoggy and Scooter were ushered into the foyer, and from there into the housemaster's study, where a slightly chubby man, with a haunted look on his face, was sitting in a large chair behind a desk.
"Are you Mr. Peacock, the grandson of Francis Peacock, the original robber baron?"
Hoggy asked, as soon as the maid closed the study's door behind her.
"I am,"
Mr. Peacock replied.
"Do you know about the secret tunnel that leads from your mansion all the way to the canal?"
Mr. Peacock snorted.
"Pah! I've heard about it. But isn't it just a legend?"
"It's real,"
Hoggy assured him.
"We can show you how to open it."
The owner of the mansion leaned back in his chair, and crossed the fingers of his hands on his belly.
"I presume this information isn't free?"
"It isn't,"
Hoggy confirmed.
"It'll cost you £10,000.
The man chuckled.
"That's quite a sum."
"You are a millionaire," Scooter reminded the man.
"I am,"
Mr. Peacock admitted, not without some self-satisfaction.
"but it is still a lot of money. I'm not sure I want to waste it on something like that. I've done just fine without the tunnel until now."
Hoggy surveyed the study. There was a photograph of a woman on Mr. Peacock's desk. The woman had small dark eyes that resembled the tips of drill bits, and very thin, stern lips.
"Do you have a wife?"
Hoggy asked the millionaire suddenly.
"I do."
"And does your wife like society parties?"
Mr. Peacock considered the question for a few moments, and then said,
"Do you want cash or cheque?"
The next morning, Hoggie and Scooter went to Icarus's. It is impossible to describe the astonishment on Icarus Finn's face, when the children walked into the shop, and placed on his worn-out counter a bag full of 10 and 20-pound notes.
"What is this?"
the bookshop owner asked.
"Your debt,"
Hoggie replied.
"all of it. £10,000.
Icarus remained speechless for several moments.
"It may be a rude question," he said at last, "but where did you get this kind of money?"
"We earned it," Scooter replied honestly.
"Please take it."
The shop owner once again studied the huge mountain of money on his counter, and then the children. Suddenly, his face, which had looked so tired and worried for many weeks, softened.
"Thank you, Hoggie. Thank you, Scooter," he said with a gentle smile. "You are very kind, and you are real friends. But," he added, "I cannot take your money." "Why not?" "Because I have no idea when I'll be able to repay it to you." "You don't have to," Hoggie explained. "Friends don't lend money to each other when they're in trouble. It's a gift."
Icarus was even more surprised.
"In this case, I most certainly cannot take your money. How can I take money from you, Hoggie, when I know that you and your aunt are just as much in need as I am?" "We are fine," Hoggie assured him. "Aunt Michelle works for Peducci's now. Please take the money, Mr. Icarus. We want you to keep the shop. This place," she looked around, "we love it as much as you do. It will break our hearts if they turned it into a bar or a hat shop."
Icarus Finn looked at Scooter. The boy nodded vigorously. The bookshop owner sat down on his stool, and considered his friend's unusual offer for a few moments.
"I will take your money on one condition," he said at last. "You two will agree to become my business partners."
Hoggie and Scooter exchanged bewildered glances.
"When you say business," Scooter asked, "do you mean the bookshop?" "Yes."
Now Hoggie, too, was beginning to understand.
"Do you want me and Scooter to own the bookshop with you?"
"Yes."
"All these books? These wonderful, wonderful books?"
"Yes." Hoggie and Scooter stared at each other in disbelief. Then at once they stretched their hands over the counter.
"Deal!"
And that's how it was that Hoggie and Scooter became the co-owners of Icarus's old and new books. The two of them spent the rest of the summer painting the house, patching up the roof, trimming the trees and the bushes outside the shop, and dusting and rearranging the books. And even after the classes started again in the fall, they would still come and work at the shop at least 2-3 times a week. It turned out that Hoggie had a real knack for business. She realized that very few bookshops in town catered to children. In fact, some bookshops would not allow children at all. She then convinced Icarus to buy some really good children's books, and to dedicate the larger part of the shop to young customers. Children were welcome at Icarus's any time, whether they came with their parents or alone. She also suggested that Icarus's serve as a lending library, as well as a shop. Children read a lot more than adults do, but they rarely have the money to buy books. Now they could, for a small membership fee, to borrow from Icarus's any popular children's titles. Hoggie and Scooter promoted Icarus's at theirs and other schools. Eventually, the bookshop grew so popular with local school students that it became known as Icarus's Children's Books. By the time Christmas came along, the bookshop was crowded. Icarus was delighted. He, Hoggie, and Scooter still had a lot of work to do before the business became a success, but at least they no longer had to worry about the bank taking the shop away from them. Even though now both Hoggie and Scooter were busier than ever, they would still visit their old friend the city library every week. They would spend a couple of quiet hours on the top floor, reading to each other. One time they sneaked onto the roof, and checked on the statue of Saint Jerome's lion. The lion was still there, sitting by its master's right side. As they were returning home that same evening, Hoggie, who had been unusually quiet and pensive all afternoon, said with a sigh, "I miss it, Scooter. I miss it so much." Scooter did not need to ask his friend what it was she missed. "So do I," he replied simply. Just before the start of the Christmas break, Mrs. Hamilton gave Hoggie a copy of an academic magazine dedicated to British history. Printed in the magazine was a story that Hoggie had written about Alexander Libri. Hoggie was very excited to see her name in print, and she spent the rest of the day reading the story to anyone who would listen. In the evening, when she and Scooter went to Icarus's, she showed the magazine to the bookseller. "I've met him once, you know," Icarus said upon reading the story. "Who?" "Alexander Libri." A long, astonished silence followed this statement. "The architect?" Scooter said at last. Icarus nodded. "When? How?" "Long time ago. I was still in school back then." Icarus smiled at the memory. "I didn't like going to school. I didn't have any friends there, and children often teased and tormented me because of my size. That particular day wasn't any different. I was reading during the recess, when one of my classmates poured milk all over my book, and called me a dwarf. I came home early. I was so upset. I hid in the corner of the bookshop and cried. I was still crying when I noticed that some man was standing nearby, looking at me. He had grey hair and wrinkles on his face. Yet he was small, just slightly bigger than I, and had such bright, curious eyes. I thought at first that he was also a boy. 'Hello,' he said. 'I am Alexander Libri. What's your name?' 'Icarus,' I said. 'Trouble at school?' I said that, yes, I had plenty of trouble. 'Why won't you tell me about it?' he said. And so I did. 'I hate school,' I said in the end. 'I'm never going back.' 'Where will you go, then, if you're not going to school?' 'Nowhere. I'm just going to stay here in my dad's bookshop. I love books. They make great friends. They teach me, and they don't torture me.' And that was when he said, 'You cannot hide in books from big problems. But they are a good place to escape to from little ones. Personally, I like to hide in the Chronicles of Narnia, the one in the Spanish armoire in your dad's study.' And then he winked at me. I thought it was the strangest thing. And as soon as he left, I sneaked into my dad's study at the back of the shop, and peeked inside the armoire. And there, on the top shelf, it was, the Chronicles of Narnia. I grabbed the book, and tried to pull it off the shelf, but it would not come out. And then, suddenly, the armoire moved away from the wall. Behind it, there was a narrow passage. All of a sudden, Hoggie had a vague feeling of anticipation, the sort one gets when one stumbles upon a heap of unexplained wrapped-up boxes hidden in the attic, and it is only 2 weeks till Christmas. "And where did it go?" she asked, her voice suddenly hoarse and faint. "To the public library." Icarus said it in such a matter-of-fact manner, as if all mysterious underground tunnels in the world ended in that one place. "Only it did not lead to the main door," he added. "It led to the foot of an iron stairway that snaked upward through a narrow shaft. And when I climbed to the top of the stairs, I found myself in a small room somewhere inside the library. Somewhere where no other people had ever been. All around the room were bookcases filled with volumes. I moved to pick one of them up, but some invisible wall stopped me. I realized then that there was a sheet of glass between the room and me. I felt about and found a handle, and when I pushed the handle, the glass opened, and out into the room I stepped. And what an interesting room it turned out to be! All those volumes, they were all children's books.
Some of them were my favourites, yet some books I had never even heard about. And the glass door through which I entered the room turned out to be a large mirror hung over a fake fireplace. And that was just one of the many rooms I discovered that day, hidden in the heart of the library, all filled with the most interesting books."
"The secret library,"
Hoggy whispered. Icarus nodded again.
"It is a truly amazing, magical place. But then again, you two already know that."
"How did you know that we knew?"
The children were stunned.
"The Book of Vipers that Hoggy had me translate," Icarus explained. "I had seen it before, in the secret library."
"Why didn't you say anything?"
Icarus smiled.
"It was your secret. I didn't want to spoil it. After all, I never told anyone about the secret library either. It was my own little world for many years, and it felt very good, very comforting to have it. I couldn't hide in that world from all my problems, but now many of these problems seemed suddenly smaller. Now, every time one of the school bullies said something nasty to me, I just laughed at him. I knew that the bullies could never defeat me or make me feel miserable again, because I had something they never would."
Suddenly Scooter realized something.
"Those newer books we saw in the Gallery of Forbidden Books, you put them there?"
Icarus nodded. Hoggy thought of something else. With all his financial troubles, Icarus Finn never thought about selling any of the very expensive books kept in the secret library. It would have been easy, too. In the whole world, just a handful of people knew of the architect's hidden legacy, so no book merchant would ever get suspicious about the book's origin. Hoggy knew that many of the titles she and Scooter had seen in the library were worth a great deal more than £10,000. Icarus Finn could have sold just one of them, and lived worry-free for years. Yet he would rather lose his shop. Hoggy always thought that Icarus was pretty cool, but now her respect for the little man had doubled.
"Mr. Icarus," Scooter said just then, "do you think we could—"
Scooter did not finish his question, but Icarus knew exactly what the boy was asking about. He smiled and then got up, and beckoned the children to follow him. He led them to the back of the shop, where, in a dusty little study, the old Spanish armoire was standing. Icarus opened the armoire, and pulled on a worn-out copy of the Chronicles of Narnia. With a low rumble, the armoire moved aside, revealing an entrance to the underground passage. Hoggy and Scooter gasped.
"Go on, then,"
Icarus said, handing Hoggy a flashlight.
"I'll wait for you in the shop."
"You're not coming?"
Icarus smiled again and shook his head.
"It is yours now."
Their hearts throbbing in excitement, the friends made their way through the passage that meandered under the city, and then up an iron ladder into the very heart of the city library. Then, just as Icarus Finn before them, they opened the glass door over the fake fireplace, and stepped into the children's books room.
"I've missed this place,"
Scooter said, inhaling the smell of old books noisily.
"Me too."
Hoggy's voice faltered, and she even felt tears swelling in the corners of her eyes. She was so happy to be back in this wonderful place the genius of Alexander Libri had created.
"Something occurred to me, though,"
Scooter said, with just a hint of sadness in his voice.
"One day we are going to be too big to get through that door."
Hoggy nodded. It had occurred to her, too. They had grown quite a bit in the past few months, and already, as they were walking through the underground passage, they had difficulty squeezing through it in places. One day, perhaps, in a year or two, both she and Scooter would be too big to get into the secret library. Only Icarus, who would never grow either big or old, would continue to visit this place. He then would be the library's guardian again, until some other children discovered it by chance. Surprisingly, Hoggy was not saddened by this thought. She sat down in the chair by the fake fireplace, and surveyed the rows of the wonderful children's books she had not yet read.
"You know, What I like the most about books, Scooter," she said, smiling, "you never run out of them.